This episode of Storycomic Presents is sponsored by JanusPointPress.com. Watch out for wormholes. Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 316. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and award-winning artist and comic creator, Brad Guigar.
Thank you, Barney. I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited. I'm a big fan of your podcast.
Well, Brad, I've been following your stuff for lots of years. I remember back when it was episode 100 of Comic Lab. It's so because you started that with your friend Dave, and the two of you were part of a group of 4 cartoonists, correct?
Back in the day, Dave Kellett, Scott Kurtz, Chris Straub, and I wrote the How to Make Webcomics book together. Yeah. And to promote that book, we did a podcast called Webcomics Weekly. Now, this was in the early 2000s, before podcasts really were a thing, and certainly before monetizing a podcast was a thing. Well, long story short, that podcast came to an end because all of us were kind of busy. We started getting our schedules were getting full up in our own careers and so forth. And so it was almost impossible to get all 4 of us to do a show together. And in 2018, Dave had been after me at that point for a couple of years. I was like, I don't think we can do this. I don't think we can do this. And he's like, going into 2018, he says, here's the thing. We're on the phone almost every week, talking comics and joshing around with one another. Why don't we'll just put microphones into the mix? It'll be the same thing. And so in January of 2018, the first week of January, we recorded our first show, and we've been recording 2 shows a week ever since.
Wow.
6 years later, we're still plugging away, still having our weekly comics chat, except now we're recording it.
You used to be able to, you record them, then a couple of days later it was live, but now you kind of created a buffer of episodes. So how important is that to kind of get that buffer created?
Well, it's a good news, bad news situation. The good news is we've got a buffer. So, his kids are younger than mine. So you know how it is when your kids are small and they get sick and so forth. You've got a whole lot more in your hands than I do. My kids are 17 and 21. And if they get sick, you just, go lie down. I'll bring you a soda later on today. Try not to make a mess, So, but with both of us and our lives and our businesses, we have to have a little bit of a buffer, or else we run the risk of going right up against the deadline, and nobody likes that. So the good news is we've got a good 4-week deadline now on both of our shows, the Public Comic Week, Comic Lab show, and Pro Tips, which is a Patreon exclusive that goes out every week. We've got a good 4 weeks on both of those. That's the good news. The bad news is when we talk about news and current events and stuff, it's going to be a month until you hear it. In fact, just now on the show that went live today, we were talking about the rumors that Elon Musk was going to take all of Twitter behind a paywall. And it was the very first rumblings of that 4 weeks ago, and what would happen and so on and so forth. At that point, he was pitching an $8 a month version of Twitter. And of course, that story has evolved since then. But just today, we get around talking to each other about, would you or wouldn't you subscribe for Vanilla Ice Cream Twitter? So it's good that we're ahead. Sometimes it suffers a little bit in the timeliness, but we always try it in stuff like that. When we talk about stuff that's current, we try to bring something to it that's a little bit evergreen. That's a bigger issue. That's something that you can still take away, because if the story is moved by then, you're not, and all you're doing is talking about the story, then you're not going to get a lot out of it.
Right, but you also have on your Comic Lab Patreon page, though, in a way, this is also a good marketing technique to encourage people to join that tier that comic lab tier, because then you can be involved in the live chat of while you're still conversing about that topic live as it's happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you have your Comic Lab Patreon page, and you also have your own Patreon page. So how important is it as someone that actually creates comics, as an indie comic creator, somebody that's wanting this to be a business as well? How do you balance the point of having your own website, because you want to have your own real estate on the web, a place that you can call your own, but balancing that through also utilizing Patreon and utilizing Kickstarter and some of these other opportunities as well?
There's no balance. They all work together in one big machine. My opinion is, even though if you're under 30 and you're listening to the show, you're going to roll your eyes and just cast me away as an old man. You've got to have your own website. And if I can go into a whole conversation of why that is, but I'll just say, trust me, if you want more reasons, then go listen to Comic Lab. We talk about it nearly every week. But the website works in conjunction. In fact, I've got a bunch of exclusive Patreon comics on my website that you can log in with Patreon to unlock and see on the website.
Okay.
So what I found, and again, if you're still listening and you're under 30, congratulations. But listen to this. When I do onboarding for a new Patreon backer, and I ask them, how did you find out about what I'm doing? How'd you find out about my Patreon specifically? About 70% of them say they found out through my website. Not through Twitter, certainly not through Instagram, not through Facebook, not through any of the newcomers. They're finding out about what I'm doing through my website. And that's significant. That's really important. It shows the power of a website. If you think that Webtoons is the only place to get a comic reader, you're going about this all wrong. You're way off base. Same thing with Tapas. They're all good for what they are. Do read the terms of service before you get involved. I for a while I used to mirror my stuff, but no, the website works in conjunction with all of that. The website is where people find out about my Patreon and my Kickstarters and stuff like that. And the Patreon content in some cases goes onto the website in special areas where you have to unlock it with your Patreon login. It all works together. It's not a balancing act at all. It's all part of the same big thing that we're trying to do on a month by month basis.
And so how do you also balance, because I know that you've done successful Kickstarters along with it. So the Patreon is more utilized to give value to your readers, and how much of your Patreon audience translates into Kickstarter backers?
Yeah, that's a great question, because people make this mistake all the time, and they think they owe their Kickstarter crowd Patreon rewards, and vice versa. They think they owe Patreon backers Kickstarter rewards. And the fact of the matter is, that's a horrible thing to do. Don't ever do that. Kickstarter and Patreon are two completely different things. Patreon is and this is truer now than it ever was. It's not a tip jar. It's not a place for quote unquote support. Nobody wants to support you on Patreon. If you're saying support me on Patreon, stop and think. The person you're talking to is having a hard time supporting themselves. They don't want to support you too, right? So don't say support me on Patreon. Say join us on Patreon, because what they are willing to pay for subscription content. You already know that from Netflix, Hulu, any number of other subscriptions they've got. Say join us. You're having a party. They are looking for community. They are looking for entertainment and fun. So Patreon is for subscription content. You put content up there that somebody would like to subscribe to, and it turns into a monthly revenue source for you that you have to keep feeding, you have to keep building, and you have to keep putting that stuff up there. But Patreon is for monthly interactions, a monthly subscription. Kickstarter, on the other hand, is for merchandise. Kickstarter is for, basically, it's a very fancy way of getting pre-orders for your merchandise. And then, of course, I don't have to explain the rest to you. You take the money from the Kickstarter and you do the order and then you fulfill it. Those are two completely separate things. And I see cartoonists doing this all the time. They think they owe their Patreon rewards to Kickstarter backers and Kickstarter rewards to Patreon backers. Well, that not only is that not true, you'll find that your Patreon backers are thrilled to support your Kickstarter, thrilled to be early or pledging over there on Kickstarter. And when you run a Kickstarter and you talk about your Patreon, lo and behold, Kickstarter backers that discover you through Kickstarter are thrilled to become Patreon backers. They don't expect, hey, I'm a Kickstarter backer, so you got to give me Patreon. Not only do they not expect it, but when people love your stuff that much, they are overwhelmingly joyful to get involved in the other thing. So those two things, always keep them separate. and I've had very, very good luck with using Patreon. For example, when I do a Kickstarter, I will, on the day it opens, I won't say anything to anybody about it except my Patreon backers. I do what I call a quiet open. And I'll put a couple of levels up there that have free shipping. And I open up that Kickstarter and I go, hey, just for the Patreon backers, not for anybody else. Order within the next 24 hours, you'll get free shipping. When 24 hours is up, I'm taking those reward levels that have free shipping, I'm shutting them down, and then I'm going to announce to the world. Well, what happens then? Of course, all of your Patreon backers are thrilled. Not only are they getting an extra reward for being your Patreon backer, but they're getting free shipping, which is no skin off your nose because you're building that into the overall Kickstarter goal anyway. And boom, day one, within 24 hours, you've got a whole bunch of Kickstarter backers. Well, guess what that does to the Kickstarter algorithm? You're right there at the top because you came out of the gate like a loaded gun, right? And so now the next day you open it up to the world. Everybody sees your Kickstarter on day one with a whole bunch of pledges. You're already juicing the Kickstarter algorithm and you're off to the races.
So, because you have to launch it. So that counts the first 24 hours.
Yep.
So would you say, all right, I'm going to create the Kickstarter to be 31 days instead of 30 days? Or
don't get hung up on days. That's the biggest mistake you can make. People think it's got to be 30 days, 31 days. Here's the deal. It's got to be in that neighborhood. 30, it could be 32, it could be 28. Here's what's much more important than any of that, Barney. And that is you've got to start. My Kickstarters, I like to see them start Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Never on the weekend. And Monday and Tuesdays aren't so great either. But Wednesday, people tend to get paid on Thursdays and Fridays. They've got extra money on Thursdays and Fridays. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, great days to open. And guess what? Those are also great days to close, right? So I'm going to try and get about 30 days. I'm going to open on a Thursday if possible, and I'm going to close on a Thursday. And see, this is where if you say, well, 30, 31 days, and that's where you see a lot of Kickstarters, because they hold to that 31 day thing, they end on a Saturday when nobody's paying attention. And
that's true.
I've seen a lot of them fail their funding by inches because of something like that. So no, don't get all hung up on 30 days, all that stuff. Open on a Thursday or Friday, close on a Thursday and Friday, and have in the neighborhood of 30 days in between.
You've been doing this, as I said, Greystone Inn started in 2000. Which is your tour de force, I gotta say. That was like,
it was my big FU to the newspaper syndicates that were sending me rejection slips by the bushel basket. And my big master plan was to start posting Greystone Inn. It was a daily comic strip posted on a GeoCities website. And it built such an audience that they had to sign me to a newspaper syndication contract. That was my big master plan. And I'll tell you right now, I know exactly where all those rejection slips are. I still have them in a folder. They're right over there in my studio. And the last 23 years of my comics business has been fueled by exactly that spite. It's still F you for sending me rejection slips. That's when I'm not sure I want to get out of bed in the morning and go do a comic. I think about those rejection slips and I'm fired up again.
That's classic revenge success right there.
Yeah. It's all spite. It's not a pretty thing. It's not something I'm proud of, but gosh darn it, it works.
You do the story, you do the comic lab piece, and you also do your Evil Ink. So what advice would you give on balancing time? Because these are two separate but incredibly important to you creative endeavors that you're working on.
Yeah, I wouldn't even suggest anybody try to do it until they really have time management down pat. Like I wouldn't say, like some people, we've got the question come in to Comic Lab quite a bit. Do you think I should start a podcast? And we're like, no, you should not start a podcast. Time management is really difficult. And as a matter of fact, I was great at time management when I had a day job because I was doing a daily comic strip. My kids were small. I was a full-time dad. I had a full-time job that was a night job. And I was doing a 5-day-a-week comic strip without fail. And I was a warrior when it came to time management. I had it down to the second. I was sleeping about 6 hours a night, maybe 7 on a lucky time. I was seeing my wife 5 minutes a day, literally, for 5 days a week. But I was good at time management. When I left my day job in 2012, my time management fell apart because now all of a sudden I had too much time and I really had to manage it, right? So like right now, my schedule on Mondays, I teach 2 classes at the University of the Arts here in Philadelphia. On Tuesday, I record Comic Lab with Dave. That usually takes a better part of the day by the time we do setup and record 2 shows. And then after that, I'm kind of brain dead. I'm not good for much other than that. And then it's Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday when I'm getting most of my work done. If there's nothing going on with the family, I'll sneak upstairs to a little satellite studio I've got up there and bang out a few things. But I would not suggest anybody try to do who's really passionate about comics, somebody who really wants to turn comics into their job, into a sustainable financial revenue situation. I would not suggest doing other things like a podcast and all this other stuff. I think it's a real disastrous move because it's really hard to to get all that stuff done and to be really good at the thing that you're trying to do. So I wouldn't suggest somebody trying to do that until they really, really are masterful at time management.
Right. I mean, like, it's the point that you brought up in one of your podcasts as well is that like it takes a lot of years to be an overnight success. So
yeah, that's the truth. I'm still waiting.
You did. So you brought up before we went live on before the show started, we were talking about one of your pieces of advice you gave a few years ago as well. Is looking towards romance authors when it comes to promotion. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that?
Well, for a long time, my wife has been telling me that I was really missing the boat by not reading romance. And I'm like, of course, I had the same image in my head that we all have, right? Bodice rippers and period pieces and longing looks from across the ballroom. And she's like, nah, you don't know what you're talking about. And she said that romance has gotten a lot different. And so I started looking into it. Long story short, oh my God, there's some great stuff being written out there. And romance tends to be, most publishers make bank on romance. They don't talk about it, but it's one of their main income streams. And of course, self-publishing with romance has gone through the roof. And so as I was reading some people and as I was getting acclimated into this, I started following them on social media. I started following people that I'd learn about. I'd listen to podcasts that were related to romance authors, and I'd keep adding them to social media and so forth. And I'm telling you right now, if you're a person in comics and you want to learn how to do good social media, you need to start paying attention to what romance authors, particularly, I mean, all of them in general, but particularly the ones that lean into self publishing. You start watching what those romance authors are doing on social media. They're doing a master class every week in and week out. They're just doing some amazing outside of the box thinking, and I'm stealing ideas from them left and right.
Watch out for wormholes, because a good book is a wormhole, whether it's paper or pixels. Explore our artist books and chapbooks, including the winning 2022 Chautauqua Janus Prize Lecture at januspointpress.com. And sign up for news of our upcoming sci-fi, sensual, and literary collection, Event Horizon. This short story collection on cosmic decisions and their impact is written by award-winning author Stephanie Nina Pizzarillos and features comics, prose, photography, and original canvas work by an array of exciting artists. Visit januspointpress.com. For those that want to say, hey, this sounds interesting, Brad, tell me a little bit more about Evil Inc.
Yeah, well, Evil Inc. is a comic I started in 2005. The central conceit is that it's a corporation that's run for supervillains by supervillains, because you can do more evil if you do it legal. That was my elevator pitch at comic conventions back when I used to do comic conventions. But it's a corporation run by supervillains. That's kind of like the world that is set up there. Is you've got corporatized supervillains, so of course you have to have a quasi-corporate superhero response. Although in this case, the corporation crumbled and the government has taken it over at this point. But all of that is kind of like meaningless, because it's world building stuff. But really what it is, it's about the interpersonal relationships between heroes and villains. And one particular pair in specifically, and that is Captain Heroic, who is obviously one of the city's top superheroes, and Miss Match, the aptly named Firestarter supervillain who works at Evil Inc., and they have a secret love affair. Right. And that's really what Evil Inc. is all about, is kind of that relationship and all of the other relationships that sprout out from it. For example, Captain Heroic's dad was a Silver Age superhero, and it turns out he had liaisons with supervillains, but he's kept it down low. He's kept it hush hush, and he's very upset with his son for even considering this. And those are the relationships that I really like to write about. Evil Inc. was a comic strip up until 2016. 2016, the web changed a lot. I had realized that the web, like as of 2016, between social media and just how people were reading comics on the web had changed, and also ads. Ads had died so much. When we first started back in 2000, doing a daily comic strip, kind of the reason that so many webcomics were comic strips back then was that was the best format for running advertising on your site. If you had a new comic on your site every day, 4 panels a day, boom, 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 you could do really well in advertising. Well, after about 2013, ad blockers came up, and the ad revenue crashed on everybody's sites. So between the death of online advertising and the changes in how people read comics and social media, I decided that this was the time to stop doing a comic strip, and I reimagined it as more of a graphic novel. So in 2016, I rebooted Evil Inc., restarted all of the relationships because I'd also, just learning from my mistakes, day one in Evil Inc. in the comic strip back in 2000, Captain Heroic and Miss Match were married. It was a secret marriage, but they were married, and they had a kid. Well, I'm sure it's very obvious to all of you listening, but it wasn't obvious to me in 2000. That's where most like romantic stories, that's where most romantic comedies, that's where they end. Is with the couple, fully entwined and, raising a kid together. That's kind of where most of these stories come to an end. I had missed all the best storytelling parts, the how I met, your mother, how I met your father type stuff. So I restarted all the relationships, and it's been going strong since 2016, taking larger story swings instead of limiting myself to 4 panels. I now post on social media and on my website. I post a half a page at a time, which for my size pages evens out to about 7 or 8 panels at a time. It's more like, if you remember the Asterix books from Europe, it's that size page. So I get a lot more story swing. I don't have to hit a punchline in the 4th panel. I can do more story. I can do more development. And once I did that, my stuff really took off. That's when I really saw my numbers grow. My audience started responding. It was a big step, because I think I just write better. I think I write funnier. I think I write more compellingly. If I'm not trying to throw a punchline every 4 panels, it's a lot more graceful way to tell a story.
Talk to us a little bit about, do you write out a script and then do the art? Are you sketching and kind of seeing where the story's going to go? How's that process work? So
what I do is I write a chapter at a time, and most of my chapters are about 22 to 24 pages. So I've got an overall arc that I have in mind for the characters, but I'll just write a chapter at a time. And what I'll do is I will write that chapter out a longhand, just like paragraph after paragraph. This happens, then that happens, then this happens, and that happens. And I'll work out my story beats. And I'm a big believer in the story circle that Dan Harmon talks about from Rick and Morty. And you can look up, there's a very good explainer on YouTube that talks about it. But I'll put my story up against the story circle, and I'll say, I'll inevitably find that I missed a step. Right? Oh, geez, I could come back here and have this happen, and then that makes it much more. It hangs together story-wise. The narrative really zings at that point. So I'll bring it up against the story circle and rewrite it, and then I'll carve it into story beats. And again, this is literally just this happens, then that happens, then this happens, then that happens. It might be 2 or 3 paragraphs for a 24-page comic, okay? And then I'll divide those into days, and then each day I've got like a sentence. I'll just, for the sake of argument, the sentence might be, Captain Heroic goes to the store, wants to buy milk and bread, finds out that there's no milk and bread, decides to go to a restaurant instead, right? That's the story beat that happens there. If you notice, there's no dialogue, there's no action, there's actually not a whole lot of there. In fact, the restaurant part that I told you probably wouldn't even be part of that. It's probably what would happen as I solve the problem. So as I'm working from week to week, I've got all of my story beats roughed in, but I have no idea what's really going to happen. I know where it's going to go. I don't know how it's going to get there. So then what I can do then is I can work week after week after week without worrying about that stuff on page 13. Today, I'll start working on page 3 of the chapter I'm working on right now. It's got 2 sentences on the page, and I will write a top half and a bottom half. Each one of those will have an entry point for new readers and something significant happen on that last panel, because that's the only way I'm going to keep retaining readers is if when I post it on social media, something's got to happen. And it doesn't matter if you've never read my stuff and you've never ever heard of me. You've got to see that something happened there. You've got to be able to grok that this thing, it was significant. And so my writing challenge to this week is going to be page 3. I'm going to have to come up with a setting, dialogue, what happens, what it means. Hopefully say something significant. Better yet, a punchline in that 7th panel, and write a 7-panel top and a 7-panel bottom. And then when I got that done, then I can start penciling and inking and all that kind of fun stuff. But the writing, I've come up with a good system, I think, that allows me to kind of rough it out in one big writing session and then just take it a page at a time and make each one of those pages as good as I can.
Right. Evil Link, it's an ongoing series as of now, but you plan on having it be finite where there's going to be X amount of story arcs and then you'll move on to another project, or is this something you're going to be doing for a long time?
It has a certain degree of finiteness to it, right? I do at some point. I can't keep teasing Captain Heroic and Mismatch any more than I already have since 2016. At some point, they're going to get together, and then the question that I haven't answered for myself, quite frankly, is: do I do something completely different? Do I take and just shift the universe and focus on another couple? Do I just hang it up and go take a long walk? That I honestly don't know. At some point, Captain Heroic and Mismatch inevitably will get together. That's very obvious reading this comic.
Right.
But what happens after that? Again, in the same way that I kind of rough out these chapters and I don't worry about the page until I get there, it's kind of the same thing. I'll worry about what happens after they finally tie the knot and everything is, at a position of stasis with their relationship.
You, Brad, have the capacity to be able to look deep into what's happening in the indie comic scenes, but you also have this academic perspective to look at what's happening in a 30,000 foot view. So you mentioned before in a previous interview about the 5 ages of comics that we're in. Will you explain that a bit?
Yeah. I mean, well, so going back to the late 90s, early 2000s, and there was this huge explosion of content. Webcomics specifically was in my purview, but all kinds of blogging and live journaling and stuff like that. A lot of us exploded onto the scene in 2000. And the web, as far as webcomics has gone, the web has gone through 4 distinct changes during that time, and we're in the 5th right now. And the reason I brought this up on Comic Lab was that we get, like, right now we're in a really weird place where we, in terms of social media specifically, we're in the decline. I think we're in the decline of social media right now. I think when we finally, all the dust clears, the 5th age of webcomics, we're going to call this post-social media or social media decline, because really nobody is getting the social media reach they got. But the thing that I like to remember when stuff like this happens is that we've had 4 times before this, 4 distinct periods, and we've survived every one of them. Every one of them seemed like the world was going to come to an end. And every time, actually, the world got better. I'll tell you what I mean. The first age was pseudo syndicates. All right. So all of us in 2000s started doing comics on the web. And then we tried to recreate the success we saw in the bigger world. And that was newspaper syndicates, because, again, most of us were comic strip artists because that played best for the ads. So we formed pseudo syndicates like Keen Spot and Modern Tales. And a bunch of us would group up, pool all of our traffic. 1 or 2 people would be in charge of the advertising systems because they were complicated and hard to land. The ad system would get hooked up into the syndicate. and you'd get your cut of the syndication money based on the traffic that you contributed. And it was a very good system. It was a very good system. The only problem was it did not scale. As you grew, it did not grow particularly. And we quickly realized that we're going to have to figure something out. It was painful, right? It was like, we don't know whether we're going to make it through this. But then we had atomization, the phase 2 of webcomics, when everybody realized we don't need to be part of a syndicate. And we actually, what happened is we broke up into smaller and smaller groups until finally we were all independents. Right now, you look around at somebody who says, "Oh, I started a webcomics," and you say, "Oh, where is it at? Is it at Webtoons? Is it at Tapas? Where's your website?"
Right.
But back then, to have your own website was mind blowing, right? It was I went from KeenSpot to Blank Label Comics, right? Which was a whole a half dozen or so of us that created basically a smaller KeenSpot. And then we went even to
and you raised money for Hurricane Katrina, too.
Yes, that was our big deal. Yeah, we did a fundraiser. We raised a lot of money for Hurricane Katrina. And then we made a smaller group called Half Pixel. And then after Half Pixel, we all just made our own websites, and it was the atomization of webcomics. Everybody went, and very quickly we realized, I can hook up a plug and play advertising revenue system to my website. It took me about a Saturday afternoon to figure that out, and then I was running my own business from that own point. So that was the second phase, was atomization. Then the third age, social media. Social media came and completely changed how we did everything. It changed how we published. It changed how we made money. It changed everything, and everything went to social media. Everything was the whole game was being played there. No big surprise. The fourth age was crowdfunding. Crowdfunding crested just after social media, and it was that I talked about it earlier in the show, but in 2013, when ad blockers started to make it look like I was going to have to go back, I had left my day job when shortly before ad blockers showed up. I had left my day job, so my comic strip website was paying most of my bills on ad revenue at that point. And then every month after ad blockers came up, it was a little bit less, and it was a little bit less, and it was a little bit less. And for quite a while there, I thought I was going to have to go back and find a day job again, because I didn't know how I was going to make this thing go, because everything that I had learned in those previous ages was inconsequential, right? And then crowdfunding came along. Kickstarter became a huge player, and then when Patreon happened, it was a huge explosion again. Patreon changed the way all of us do business. You talk to webcomic artists from now until doomsday, you might find 3 that would want to go back to advertising. And all 3 of them need their head examined. But the rest of us are doing way better today than we ever did in an advertising revenue situation. So crowdfund, we're now going from the fourth age crowdfunding. And I'd say right now, the point I was making on Comic Lab is that we're in the fifth age, which is a post-social media age. We're in the decline of social media. Twitter, which almost all of us had really relied on for reach and for engagement, is tanking hard. Instagram delivered big follower numbers, impressive follower numbers, but never delivered what was important to people like us, and that's the ability to make money. Right? I know Dave. Dave's got 40,000 in the neighborhood, 40,000 Instagram followers. Dave Kellett, my co-host, and every time he runs a Kickstarter, we track how many of those 40,000 come over to become Kickstarter backers, and every time it's like single digits, 3, 4. So Instagram, you can make big follower numbers, but you can't actually direct that traffic off of Instagram, which makes Instagram, surprise, useless, right? So, and Facebook was useless way before Instagram. And now we've got a whole bunch of different wannabe platforms that are trying to take over for Twitter, right? And especially when Twitter's tanked hard a couple months ago. Every time Elon Musk makes another ridiculously stupid move, you see a whole bunch of people going to Blue Sky and a whole bunch of people going to Threads and a whole bunch of people going to Mastodon. And what happened just recently when Threads, do you remember, Barney, when Threads had that big opening weekend when all of a sudden, hey, Threads is here, and they had like hundreds of thousands of signups in the first 24 hours. And everybody was on Threads for that first week. Just social media with tappity, 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 tap, yappity, yappity, yap, reshares, likes, follows, engagement. And then after that first week, it bottomed out on Threads. And I was sitting there, we were recording shows, Dave and I said, well, Threads is it. Threads is the Twitter killer. Everybody's going to be on Threads. I don't know how I feel about it because it's just Instagram part 2, but that's what we're going to be. But then it bottomed out. And now everybody's sitting there asking themselves, why didn't Threads take? And right now, I'm actually getting better engagement on Blue Sky than I'm getting on Threads. I'm getting nothing on Threads. And here's what I think. I think it has nothing to do with Threads. It has nothing to do with Blue Sky or Twitter. It has everything to do with us. We, as a group of people, creators, readers, users, everybody who uses social media, we as a group of people have decided we're over social media. Threads gave us everything we wanted to replace Twitter with, and we did it for a week, and we're like, yeah, I'm over this. And so that's why I'm very confident we're in the post-social media age, and there's a lot of money in it for someone who can figure out what's next. I have no idea what's next. I'm a little bit frightened to launch my next Kickstarter because I relied on Twitter to get the word out a big time for stuff like that, and I'm not getting anywhere near the engagement. It's going to put a big hurt on a lot of people, and we're gonna. And it just might be. And Dave rolls his eyes every time I say it. I think we might be going back to that phase 2, atomization, where everybody's just floating out there, doing their own thing and trying to. And by the way, we made that phase work. We made that age work. We did it by and go ahead. You can laugh. We did it with web rings. I know. I know it's an old concept. We did it with cross promotion. We did it with making networks with other creators. We made it happen. We made that atomization phase of the internet happen. I think honestly, we're going back to it. I right now I'm banging the drum on Patreon content exchanges. It's so frustrating because I've got to explain the concept. I give you some exclusive content. You give it to your readers on Patreon. Right. You give me some of your exclusives. I reward my backers with it. We cross promote. We don't put it out on public. And you thrill your Patreon backers by giving them a reward that they didn't see coming today. And by the way, every time I've done this, both sides gain backers. Everybody's scared to do it because they're like, oh yeah, and then you're going to steal all my backers. Never happens. What happens is your backers go, oh, this is cool too. I want it and the thing I already got. Everybody gains backers. But it's so hard. I gotta keep promoting that idea. But I think we're gonna have to do stuff like that more and more as we're in the post-social media age of webcomics, because social media clearly isn't delivering it anymore. It's one of the big reasons that Patreon a couple weeks ago just tried to relaunch itself and reposition itself, adding a lot of social media features in because they're trying to replace that. I don't know how useful it's going to be. So far, I kind of have my doubts, just based on how I'm using Patreon. But it's good that it's good to see they're on top of it and they're trying things. They're not just sitting there letting things happen. They're trying things out, even if it's not necessarily working for me. But yeah, I think we're in the fifth age of webcomics, and it's post social media, and it's painful as hell. But the thing to remember as you lie awake at 2:00 in the morning is that this has happened 4 other times, and each time, not only did we as creative independent creators, not only did we survive, but life got better each time.
So Brad, if people want to learn more about your work and kind of follow you on Comic Lab or also Evil Inc., where's the best place they could go to?
Yeah, just go to evil-inc, that's INC.com. There is an Evil Inc. with a K, that's Coheed and Cambria does a comic. And you're gonna get very disappointed if you're looking for Coheed and Cambria and you're getting me instead. So go to evil-inc.com. That's my hub for just about everything that's going on. And you can see Evil Inc. After Dark, which is the NSFW side of Evil Inc. Also, you'll see Comic Lab stuff there, my books, just a whole lot of stuff happening. And of course, you can always catch me on Twitter for as long as that lasts. And my handle is @Guigar. That's my last name. It's spelled like guitar, but with a G for a T.
Yeah, you're on Mastodon. You're on, what is it, Reddit. You're on Patreon. You're on all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Well, listen, that's partly I do that because I just want to experiment with it. Partly I do, like Mastodon, I wouldn't even be on if it wasn't for Comic Lab. But I kind of feel like if I'm going to talk about it on the show, I've got to have first person experience. I will tell you right now, Mastodon is not the replacement. Mastodon ain't it. It's not even coming close. It's a great idea. I love the concept, but in terms of realistically doing what we needed to do, it ain't going to be Mastodon. But I still have my eye on Threads and Blue Sky. I still have hope. But like I said, I think we're over it. I don't think there's going to be a Twitter replacement. I think we're heading into another phase of atomization.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Brad. This has been amazing. So
thank you, Barney. This has been an absolute joy.
All right, Brad, let me do the intro and we'll jump right into it. So
sounds good.
See, this was banter. This was pre-show banter.
That's a nice little warm-up. That was a nice little way to get going.
Get going. All right, here we go.